Welcome to Complex Sentences. In this video, we will understand and analyze complex sentences with examples that we can find in classic literature. So let's begin. What is a complex sentence? A complex sentence is a type of sentence that expresses a complete idea in two clauses, one independent and others independent, joined by a subordinator. We have different types of subordinators, as subordinating conjunction for noun clauses and adverb clauses, relative adverb for noun clauses, relative clauses and adverb clauses, and relative pronoun for noun clauses and relative clauses. And exist different types of dependent clauses, as noun clauses, relative clauses, and adverbs clauses. Noun clauses. They are a type of dependent clauses that act like a noun. They have different types, like that clause, WH clause, and if whether clause. It also has different functions, as subject, direct object, subject complement, and prepositional object. We can find in different contexts, as after a transitive verb or speaking of thinking, after a transitive verb, after a linking verb or a prepositional verb, or before a conjugated verb. They have different uses as statement, indirect questions, or reported speech. Relative clauses have different types too, defining and no-defining. Functions as subordinators like subject, direct object, and prepositional object, and the antecedent that it's noun or pronoun that the relative clause gives information about. The first example of a noun clauses is what I heard was abominable. What I heard is a dependent clause, which means that it's a noun clause. What's abominable, it's the independent one. This noun clause is the WH clause type and have the function of the subject. We found it in the context before the conjugated verb with its was and have the use of the statement. In our second noun clause, we have the sentence, Black man's house is what I call the place with the door in consequence. This noun clause is a type of WH clause and have the function of subject complement. In this case, the context is after a linking verb and the use is also a statement. Our third example of noun clause is I foresee that we might yet involve your master in some dire catastrophe. I foresee it's the independent clause. That we may yet involve your master in some dire catastrophe, it's the dependent one. That it's a that clause and have the function of the subject. The context of this noun clause is after a transitive verb of thinking, and the use is a statement. And our first example of relative clause is the door which occupied with neither bell nor knocker was blistered and disdained. This relative clause is non-defending type and which is the relative pronoun that works as subordinator. In this case, the function of the subordinator is direct object, and the antecedent clause is the door was blistered and stained. Our second example of relative clause is my provision of the salt, which had never been renewed since the date of the first experiment, began to run low. This relative clause is also a non-defining one, and which is the relative pronoun that works as subordinator. The function of this subordinator is a direct object, and the provision of the salt began to run low is the antecedent clause. The third relative clause example is I want to ask the name of the man who walked over the child. This relative clause is a defining one, and who is the relative pronoun that works as subordinator. The function of this subordinator is as direct object, and I want to ask the name of that man, it's the antecedent clause. The fourth relative clause is it is one of those affairs that cannot be mentioned by talking. The relative clause is a defining one, and that it's the relative pronoun that it works as subordinator. In our last relative clause, the subject functions is also a direct object, and it is one of those affairs, it's the antecedent clause. And that is all. I hope you have clear what is a complex sentence, the difference between a relative clause and a noun clause, and their components.